What and how does it actually call forth and say that we ask about and after techniques, after language, and after the thing with Heidegger? What obscure legacy of technology, techniques, of language, of thought are we asking after? What does language be say here? Not simply what does it mean or what do we understand by language, grasp with this very notion or concept. We cannot yet understand technology techniques in any other way than technically, says Heidegger. But this conception, completion, tells us nothing about the essence, the abiding realm of technology techniques, but rather delivers us over and blindly into it. What are we getting into here and where are we getting with technology techniques without reminding the essence, the abiding, the realm and absconding of technology techniques? It's not only that it's a wrong or insufficient understanding on our parts here, rather we are in it even more at its mercy insofar as this, in quotation marks, thinking itself is the instrument and intervention, ceased action and means for tick. It's the indication that we are completely at mercy of technology in a kind of blind and unthought, unheard entanglement. In the quest, but not in the question of wanting to master, in quotation marks, one wants to master technology, says Heidegger. Mastery is a, in quotation marks, certain kind of violence, which is also found in the image that we have, that we give ourselves, that we render and make ourselves of it and in our relation to it. The seemingly objective, in parenthesis, objectifying understanding about the question of what we think of as the, in quotation marks, world in this, in quotation marks, understanding. It's not a question of choice, for we apply instrumental traits of language, we compute them, and that compels us to grasp ideas that always already make use of a technological regulative control steering. But what about the relation of the different causes in one thing? Not from an observed object, but rather from things themselves. How is this nexus, trait of these causes addressed and spoken, brought into and brought forth into language? The causa efficiens materializes and realizes itself in techniques, in the bringing to an end and coming to a full circle of metaphysics, and with it techniques takes, clips, and seizes place and time. The registers of four different causes in the thing are erased hereby and caught up, solved and resolved into one. This has nothing more to do with the belonging together of hyle, eidos, telos, and legein, logos, the letting be present together in collecting for one another. But what happens, in parenthesis, with us if we get involved, reflect on this unconcealment? Not reflect, but rather think after. The more initial unconcealment as evoked possibly possible, which tells us that we no longer understand anything of what the realm of technology and techniques abides in too, that we are placed in a world that rather pushes the development of the question of poiesis and techne into oblivion, and the actionable event as such becomes obliterated, disguised, and brings forth something that transcends and displaces this question, pushes it away. Art as a manner of concealing can still bear witness to the flashing of this question, to the withdrawing trait, to a holding to oneself, bringing forth as a way that actually has to surrender to the split and does not look at the techne without the poiesis. But art diminished in its reference to truth in cultural business, according to Heidegger. Let arrive into the event of appearing versus representation. Exactly this is the concordance in a specific way of the contraction of the four causes of the thing. In quotation marks, to owe versus to be present and ready. In quotation marks, to make appear and to bring into the image. Not poiesis. Setting forth of the bringing forth in itself, eg auto, poiesis. Techne belongs to poiesis, what does not bring itself forth and is not yet present but is created, made up and gets produced. The difference it is about. Nature is its own self-referential principle, no agent or agent of action. Nature also creates new forms, generates new forms. Against it stands that outside of oneself bringing forth of something else, but by means of a principle that gets set into it, installed, set up, regulatory controlled and realized by and in terms of this coming forth. Essentially, it is about the coming forms of forms or forth of forms of things in a world, on the world. The concrete is the grown together. Mimesis is not a kind of reproduction, but repetition in principle. It's a question of reconsideration on the question of poiesis, which Heidegger is after, which is split in itself, a form of broken in itself figure, always already beyond itself, in a holding and catastrophe. In technology techniques itself, some nothing is realized that leads us to ask the question about technology techniques. Control and self-control aspects. This saving and storing is the objective criterion that distinguishes modern technology techniques. It aims at a knowledge or knowing of oneself, exerted constraint of enabling by technology techniques. If it is not reflection, what is it that can bring us into a relationship, into a free relationship with technology, into an open relationship with techniques? This forge obviously cannot be solved by a self-consciousness. This has to do with the pretense and requires a going astray, Heidegger says. How such a thing comes into being is used and appears so that it does not disappear straight and directly in the realm of the imagination, is quantified, measured, and surveyed, put into its place as a standing reserve. Coming forth while withdrawing in the event takes place in a simultaneous concealing unconcealing. This gathers in itself the four ways of inducement, aletheia, and safeguards them, unconcealing at the same time its concealment. Not veritas in the sense of the correctness of the imagination is decisive for this. Things as they are present, in quotation marks, according to their essence or essential abiding, not as they present themselves technically for us. A thing has something essential, abiding in itself, what makes a thing a thing. Only as a relational relation are we affected by the thing, standing in relation to us and approximately approaching us. But the instrumentalization of all things challenges these traits. It sets the trait up, treats things as it treats everything else technically. How it gives us the technique world to show at this historical place and time of a realizing eventful arrival in an event of truth. What sends itself in it? Techno-apocalypse, hyperfuturism, control and storage occasion. It, the technology, cannot any more let go or let off. Protection of historical existence in the form of stored memories. Question of of death and the dying. The fortune to be mortal and to be able to let go. Moments of the development of technology are sick material and industrial killing. Nature and man are addressed in it and give themselves to behave as life. In parentheses, not as stock as everything else. Technology designs itself to this problematic constitution in which the power machine itself is only result, not something unified which is realized there, but a separating movement of the thing itself. Doubling of the moments, in quotation marks, position, in quotation marks, disguise of the property. There is no before. Physis always already shows itself in another. A de-speaking of the experience of truth does not dissolve in the question of storage. In parentheses, question of modern knowledge and its formations. Consider how thinking opens a way and carves a way or new ways that something is brought into a certain finiteness, in parentheses, finite comprehension, by the power machine technique. It is set up, not brought into finite comprehension, but in an eternal and stagnant form of stuck presence. In the midst of technique and the technicized world, another understanding breaks open and loose. The possibility to limit the happening of technique and to get into a relation to technique or techniques that itself is not already technical.